Investigation into alleged Russian meddling in the last U.S. election. The Office of Special Counsel Robert Mueller has just announced that criminal charges have been laid against 13 Russian nationals accused of interference. A Russian internet agency and 2 other companies are also charged. The indictments come from a U.S. federal grand jury. The CBC's Ellen Morrow joins us from Washington with more on this breaking story. This news just coming out in the last hour or so. Ellen, take us through these indictments.
Jennifer, I have the indictment right here. It's very long. It's 37 pages and extremely detailed in terms of the operation that these 13 Russian nationals are accused of carrying out to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. They're facing 8 criminal charges in this indictment, including conspiracy to defraud the United States. Now, as I said, the indictment is filled with a huge amount of detail. Basically, the goal of this operation was to sow discord in the U.S. political system ahead of the election. And these people are accused of doing this by basically posing as Americans online, creating fake social media profiles, buying political advertising, all in an effort to be divisive. So they would stage political rallies. As I said, they would post and spread derogatory material about certain people who were running, people like Hillary Clinton, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and on the flip side, post material supportive of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. And this was very detailed and sophisticated in terms of where they focused these efforts. For example, the indictment says that they focused these efforts on purple states, states that they had a chance of influencing and affecting. They would post on topics such as Black Lives Matter, issues that are already known to be divisive in the United States. And an interesting example we heard from Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein was he mentioned on the same day in New York City, these activists, these accused Russians, staged 2 rallies or helped stage 2 rallies, one in support of Donald Trump and one in opposition to Donald Trump. And that is, again, an example of how they were trying to sow discord. 2 other important things to point out. Rod Rosenstein said there's no allegation that any of this conduct altered the outcome of the election, and no allegation that any Americans who were in contact with these Russians realized who they were, because they were posing, again, as grassroots political activists trying to stir up division in the United States.
We're just beginning to get some feedback out of the Kremlin. We're just seeing on the wire now Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman saying the U.S. election meddling allegations are absurd. But I want to ask you what we're hearing so far from the White House.
Well, we haven't had a response from the White House yet. We know President Trump is heading to Florida this afternoon. There are reports that the White House is working on some kind of statement, so I think we can expect to hear something from the White House. But think about what we've heard from the White House so far. The president has repeatedly called the Russia investigation a witch hunt, a hoax. He says there's nothing to it. But this is a very detailed indictment illustrating just how these accused Russians went about trying to do just that. And there's a few other things to think about going forward beyond the reaction from President Trump. One are the upcoming midterm elections in November. We've heard from various intelligence officials, even Dan Coates, the director of national intelligence, earlier this week, saying that Russia is actively trying to meddle ahead of those elections as well. And there's lots of questions about what is being done to prevent that from happening, Jennifer.
Ellen Morrow tracking the very latest in Washington. Thank you. And for more on this now, we have reached David Sklansky. He's a criminal law professor at Stanford University and a former federal prosecutor. David is in Stanford, California. Thank you for joining me. So, bombshell developments in Washington with indictments of these 13 Russians in the Mueller investigation. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I think it should put to rest any suggestion that maybe this is all smoke and no fire. It details a lot of some pretty amazing facts documenting a coordinated Russian effort to interfere in the U.S. presidential election.
How significant is this move today with this announcement in respect to the overall Robert Mueller investigation, do you think?
I think it's very significant because one criticism that some people have made of this investigation is that it's a wild goose chase, that it's not something that's worth prosecutorial and investigative effort because there's really no there there. But there's pretty clearly a lot of there. I think this indictment makes that manifest.
So for some of the words we've heard coming out of the White House questioning the credibility of what Robert Mueller has been chasing, this, in your opinion, then lends that credibility to it?
Yeah, I think it does.
I want to ask you about some of the charges. For example, we're talking about conspiracy to defraud the United States and aggravated identity theft. How serious are those charges?
Well, they're pretty serious. I mean, any effort to defraud the United States through swaying the election is something that I think people will take seriously and should take seriously. These are felony charges, so they're pretty significant.
We heard the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, saying that according to their indictments, it looked as though there was meddling in the election for the sake of meddling and creating chaos, and that some of these Russian defendants were supporting both sides in the 2016 election. I wonder what you think in the big picture this all will mean potentially for the Trump administration.
Well, I think it poses a challenge for the Trump administration. They need to figure out how they're going to respond to this. They need to figure out whether they're going to continue to insist that the Russians were not attempting to interfere in the election, that this is all a made-up story, or whether they're going to continue to insist that the Russians were actually trying to help Hillary Clinton. I mean, this indictment does charge that a lot of the Russian efforts were aimed at disruption and creating discord. But it also charges pretty clearly and explicitly that there was a concerted effort to boost and assist the campaign of Donald Trump, and that there were contacts with unwitting members of the Trump campaign.
So what do you think we'll see next on this? Might there be further indictments now that we've had today's news?
Oh, yeah, there might be. I think that there will be an effort to extradite these defendants, although I wouldn't hold my breath that they'll actually be appearing in U.S. courtrooms anytime in the foreseeable future. The investigation will continue. I suspect the Mueller team has already looked to see whether there are people inside the United States who were knowing participants in this conspiracy, and I think that they'll continue to investigate that question, as well as to continue to pursue the leads generated from the other charges that they filed and the convictions that they've obtained.
This will no doubt be an unsettling prospect for Americans when we hear about the fact that these Russian defendants allegedly stole American identities and posed as Americans, as you say, interacting unwittingly with members of the Trump campaign who didn't realize they were working with Russian operatives. As we look ahead to the midterm elections in November, how confident can Americans feel that they, in fact, will be clean and that this kind of meddling hasn't been happening in recent months?
I think that's a great question. I don't know any reason that Americans should feel confident about that. There's no reason to think that this threat has been neutralized, as far as I can tell.
That's a grim speculation, grim thought, and certainly the kind of question that many people will be asking in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you so much for joining us on this dramatic story out of Washington today.
My pleasure.
That's former U.S. federal prosecutor David Sklansky joining us from Sacramento.